Last summer, I pulled a jar off the shelf in my garden shed, unscrewed the lid, and poured something into a watering can that smelled like sourdough bread mixed with apple cider. It was cloudy, slightly yellow, and it had been sitting in the dark for about 10 days. I diluted it down, maybe 2 tablespoons per gallon, and drenched the base of every tomato plant in my east bed. That bed had been struggling. Leaves curling slightly, growth stalled out at about 18 inches, fruit set barely happening despite full sun and decent compost. Within 2 weeks, the canopy was visibly darker. New growth was pushing out from every node, and by the end of August, that bed outproduced the one next to it by nearly 40%. The only difference was what came out of that jar. That jar was Lactic Acid Bacteria Serum, and the recipe to make it cost me less than $1. I didn't learn it from a gardening book or a university extension office. I learned it from a system called Korean natural farming, developed by a man named Cho Han-kyu, starting in the 1960s in South Korea. KNF, as growers call it, is a complete approach to soil fertility built around fermented inputs you make yourself from ingredients most people already have: rice, milk, brown sugar, fish scraps, eggshells, and vinegar. That's essentially the entire supply list. The whole philosophy is that you feed the soil biology, not the plant, and you do it with materials sourced from your immediate environment. No bags, no bottles, no subscription fertilizer service. Like Cho spent decades refining these recipes and traveled to over 30 countries teaching them. Farmers in Hawaii doubled their crop output using his methods. An entire county of rice growers in South Korea adopted the system and saw higher yields, lower costs, and measurable improvement in the waterways downstream. Most people hear that and think it sounds too simple. I thought the same thing. But 3 seasons in, I've stopped buying liquid fertilizer entirely, and my soil has never looked better. So let me walk you through the 3 recipes I use the most, starting with the one that changed my mind about all of it. Lactic Acid Bacteria Serum, or LAB, is the easiest entry point into Korean natural farming and probably the most versatile thing you'll ever make for your garden. Here's how it works. You take about a cup of rice, any white rice, and rinse it in a jar with water. Swirl it around until the water turns milky. You're not cooking anything, you're just washing the starch off. Drain that cloudy water into a clean jar, fill it about 2/3, cover it with a breathable cloth, and set it somewhere out of direct light at room temperature. Now you wait 5 to 7 days, depending on how warm it is. What you're doing is letting the ambient bacteria in your environment colonize that starch water. It'll start to smell sour, a little tangy, like the beginning of a ferment. That's exactly what you want. Now here's where it gets interesting. You strain that sour rice water and mix it with milk. Whole milk works best. The ratio is roughly 1 part rice water to 10 parts milk. Stir it once, cover it with cloth again, and leave it for another 5 to 7 days. What happens next looks almost wrong. The curds separate and float to the top. Underneath, you get this pale yellow serum. That serum is your LAB. It's packed with lactobacillus, the same bacteria that drive yogurt, sauerkraut, and kimchi. You skim or strain off the curds, bottle the serum, and store it in the fridge. It keeps for months. Look at what you just made for a moment. A concentrated probiotic for your soil. No lab equipment, no purchased inoculant, just rice water and milk. I diluted it about 1 to 20 and drench my beds every couple of weeks during the growing season. The first time I used it, I poured it on a bed that had been sitting compacted and gray looking after a wet spring. Within 10 days, the surface texture changed, darker, looser, earthworm castings appearing where there hadn't been any. I've also started adding it to my compost pile, and the breakdown rate accelerated noticeably. The pile runs hotter, finishes faster, and the end product is darker and more uniform than anything I was getting before. Korean livestock farmers use LAB in poultry houses and piggeries. Operations treated with it have virtually no odor because the beneficial bacteria outcompete the organisms that produce ammonia and sulfur compounds. If it can handle that, it can handle your raised beds. The second recipe is Fermented Plant Juice, which KNF practitioners call FPJ, and this is the one I consider the backbone of the system. You're looking for vigorous, healthy plant material, not your garden plants, wild ones, things that thrive aggressively without any help. Comfrey is a classic choice because it mines potassium and calcium from deep in the subsoil. Nettles are excellent for nitrogen and iron. Clover works well as a broad-spectrum option. Whatever grows like a weed near you and looks robust, that's your source material. The plant is telling you it already has what your garden needs. Harvest it early in the morning before the sun is fully up. That's when growth hormones and moisture content are at their peak. Chop the material roughly and weigh it. Then mix it 1-to-1 by weight with brown sugar, not white sugar, brown sugar or crude cane sugar. Pack it into a jar or a bucket. Press it down so the sugar makes contact with everything and cover the top with a breathable cloth. Within a day, you'll see liquid starting to pool. Within a week, you'll have a dark, sweet-smelling extract sitting at the bottom. And this is where everything changes. That liquid is a concentrated enzyme and nutrient solution pulled directly from plants that were already thriving in your local ecosystem. When you dilute it, about 2 tablespoons per gallon again, and apply it to your garden, you're giving your crops a nutrient profile that's specifically adapted to your climate and your soil conditions. And you didn't buy it off a shelf, you didn't ship it from a warehouse, you made it from the biology that already knows how to grow where you are. I ran a side-by-side test last season. One bed of peppers got my standard organic liquid feed on a bi-weekly schedule. The other got nothing but diluted FPJ at the same interval. By mid-July, the FPJ bed had thicker stems, more lateral branching, and heavier fruit set. Not dramatically more fruit, but bigger individual peppers with noticeably thicker walls. The total harvest weight from that bed was about 35% higher. The organic feed cost me about $20 over the season. The FPJ cost me $2 worth of brown sugar. Almost nobody talks about this part, but the plant you choose for your FPJ changes the entire character of the feed. If you make it from comfrey, specifically Symphytum uplandicum, the deep-rooting variety, you get a potassium-heavy extract that's excellent during flowering and fruiting. If you make it from stinging nettles, Urtica dioica, you get a nitrogen-forward feed that pushes vegetative growth hard. You can blend them based on what your garden needs at any given moment. You can rotate them through the season as growth stages shift. Master Cho called this the nutritive cycle theory, the idea that plants need different inputs at different growth stages, and you match your ferments to where the plant is in its life cycle. Vegetative growth gets the nitrogen-rich FPJ, flowering gets calcium, fruiting gets potassium and amino acids. Most people miss this part. They find one recipe and use it for everything. But the real power is in matching the input to the moment. The third recipe is Water Soluble Calcium, and this one genuinely surprised me with how well it works. Take eggshells. If you keep chickens, you've got a surplus. If you don't, save them from your kitchen for a couple of weeks. You want enough to fill a jar loosely. Roast them in a pan over medium heat or in the oven until they turn brown and brittle. You'll smell something almost new-tight. Crush them up, put them in a jar, and cover them with vinegar. Brown rice vinegar is traditional, but apple cider vinegar works fine. The reaction is immediate, it fizzes. The acid dissolves the calcium carbonate in the shells and converts it to calcium acetate, which is water-soluble and immediately available to plants. Let it sit for about 10 days, stirring every couple of days. When the fizzing stops entirely, strain it, and you've got a liquid calcium supplement you can foliar feed during flowering and early fruit set. Calcium is one of those nutrients that's abundant in most soils, but often locked up in forms plants can't access quickly enough during peak demand. Blossom end rot on tomatoes, tip burn on lettuce, hollow stem in broccoli, these are all calcium availability issues. This solves them without buying a single bottle of Calpol Mag. That's the mistake right there. People spend $20, $30 a season on calcium supplements when the answer is sitting in their kitchen waste. I sprayed water-soluble calcium on my tomatoes every 10 days from first flower through early fruit set last season. Not a single case of blossom end rot. The year before, I lost probably 15% of my paste tomatoes to it. Same beds, same variety, same watering schedule. The only variable was the eggshell vinegar. Now, I want to be honest about something. Korean natural farming is not magic. The science on it is real, but still developing. A study conducted at the University of Hawaii found that crops grown with K&F methods showed greater disease resistance and produced larger fruit over a longer harvest window, but also noted slower initial growth compared to conventional inputs. That matches what I've seen. The first few weeks after applying these ferments, you're not going to see explosive growth. You're building biology. You're investing in the soil ecosystem. The payoff comes later, and it comes consistently. 3 weeks into the season, my K&F beds always look a little behind, but by midsummer the gap closes, and by harvest they're ahead. Every year for 3 years running. The cost of everything I just described, LAB, FPJ, and water-soluble calcium, comes to less than $10 for an entire growing season. That covers every bed in my garden, roughly 400 square feet. The store-bought equivalents, the liquid organic feeds, the microbial inoculants, the calcium sprays ran me well over $100 a year before I switched. And the results are better now, not marginally, measurably. One more thing worth mentioning, every batch you make is specific to your environment. The lactic acid bacteria in your LAB came from the air in your neighborhood. The plant juice in your FPJ came from species that thrive in your soil and your climate. The calcium came from your kitchen. There's a closed-loop elegance to it that no product on a garden center shelf can replicate. You're not importing fertility, you're cultivating it from what's already around you. By September last year, I walked out to the east bed, the one that had been struggling in June, and I counted 43 ripe tomatoes hanging on 6 plants. The stems were thick enough that I'd stopped staking 2 of them. The leaf canopy was so dense I could barely reach the fruit in the interior, and the whole bed smelled like warm soil and that faint sourdough tang that I'd started to associate with things going right. 43 tomatoes, 6 plants, and a jar that cost me less than $1 to make.